I saw people run, so I came down here to see what's going on. I saw a lot of people coming out of the train station, screaming, yelling for help. I saw a lady, she was shot right in her leg.
She was shot in her leg.
Yeah, I mean, the 72nd precinct, they did a good job on coming quick and fast. And
We have a lot to get into today in terms of we want to cover if we were going to give you guys a snapshot overview of what we're going to discuss. Well, first off, we're going to do a two-part episode series on the individual that uh, uh, did a heinous crime in Sunset Park, New York City, Brooklyn area, specifically in New York City, where he opened fire and shot all those people. So we're going to get into the events that took place on that day, what was said, officials, and so on and so forth. And then we want to cover in a follow-up episode on the why behind the potential why or what could have led up to this incident prior to April 12th, shortly before 8:30
Mhm.
a.m. These events that took place. So, Savory, initially, I wanted to get your thoughts initially when you heard the reports what happened on April 12th, Tuesday, shortly before 8:30 a.m. What was your initial thoughts there?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but since we from New York, we've been keeping a pulse on what's going on as far as crime. We know crime's been going up. We know. So for me, unfortunately, a bit, I looked at it like, here we go again, more crime. But as I
Yeah,
look deeper into it, I'm like, oh wow, this looks pretty crazy. This looked like more targeted.
right.
But since we know what's up, right? We know what's up in the city. So we've been seeing and hearing reports of all of this happening, right? But when you look deeper, you're like, oh snap. Look at the look, who is this guy? Why did he do this? Smoke bombs, guns, like you know what I'm saying? And we'll get into that now. But it's like
Yeah, it's
I
it's
was I was like,
crazy.
wait, what?
It's
Yeah.
absolutely
So it
crazy
kinda
what
hit me
went
more.
down.
Yeah.
I have to agree. I think that when I saw the initial notification on my phone, I was just like, okay, another shooting in Brooklyn, like kind of numb to it. Were you numb to it?
Yeah, I was like, yeah, another shooting. You know what I'm saying? Because you just think it was a shooting, and then you hear underground train station. You probably thought it was that one crazy person with a gun, or because most
Facts.
violence,
Yep.
right? Let's let people know this. Most violence in a lot of inner cities, and where Macho and I are from, also the same rule applies. Is gang on gang violence, is a drug situation kind of violence, right?
Right.
So the ones for people who are not from New York who see in the people who see this in the front news as far as police brutality or crazy
Mm,
shooting, those
right.
are not the norm, right? We all know the
Not
norms,
at
and
all.
even if you're not from the city, from any inner city, you would know the norm is just crime, right? Whether that's whether that's drugs on the streets, selling, gangs, that's the norm. So when I heard this, I kind of connected that to that, and then I realized, oh, this ain't that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I think a lot of people who saw those notifications probably immediately had that in mind. And then as
Mhm.
the story, or I guess as the news reportings progressed, and we saw, wait, this is bigger than our normal thing, right?
Exactly.
I think that goes to it plays into something bigger, right? The fact that we're even numb to the smaller things, which is not really small relatively if you think about it, if
Exactly.
you're coming from outside in look perspective. I
Mhm.
think, that plays that's a different conversation, but just to get to the facts of what happened on April 12th, shortly before 8:30 a.m.
So, Chris and Mary, just utter chaos this morning at the height of the morning rush at the subway station here. We're here where it all began, 25th and 4th.
We're following breaking news. CBS 2 has obtained surveillance video that appears to show suspect Frank James on his way to allegedly carrying out the Brooklyn subway shooting.
They're on the platform. Right now, the investigation is continuing. Police are looking for the suspect. They say, again, with that orange colored vest, he was wearing a gas mask to protect himself. Right now, the counterterrorism unit does not think this was classic terrorism, as you might say.
We see Frank James, as they've uncovered a lot of this,
Mhm.
parked a white cargo U-Haul van that he rented out in Philadelphia. Okay, Savory? Parked it about 2 blocks away from the train station. Then there's video footage of him entering the train station, like, not like in the, like
Oh, I thought that was him
going
exiting.
down the
The one
stairs.
they
No,
have,
no,
that's
that
him
was
entering?
they have one that he was entering where he swiped his Metro card. He's got his
Oh, he was a good
suitcase.
citizen.
Yeah, he's got a suitcase. He's
Out
got
of
like another
control.
bag with him. I mean, this is crazy, right? And
Out of
then
control.
he couldn't even fit the suitcase through the turnstile. That's how big it was. Right?
Oh, snap.
Yeah, it's crazy. And
Actually
then,
didn't see that part, yeah.
he asked the MTA attendant, could he go through the gate, and he went through the gate, and that was the initial footage of Frank
Hey,
James. He
yo.
didn't have a gas mask on, or maybe he put a gas mask on later, but initially he had a regular, COVID mask on, like he was observing COVID, and
Yeah.
he didn't want to like worry about that. But from what I
Well,
see
it's
here,
probably an easy disguise for criminals now, right? It's an easy excuse that you could just blend in with everybody.
that
Remember
is a
that too,
great
right? There's
point.
somebody
That is a great
who
point.
spoke
Yeah.
about that as
We see a
well,
lot of
where
we see a lot of people who were robbing stores were using that, right?
yeah,
Hoodies
so
and masks.
before, if you see 2 people walking with a mask prior to the pandemic in the city, you're like, "Oh, snap." You might look twice like, "Alright, what's
Facts.
this dude
Yeah.
doing?" But now you could just blend in as a criminal with a mask and a nice hat on, and you're kinda fully covered, which is crazy. So,
That's right.
yeah, something
That's
to
right.
think about.
So what we know about Frank James specifically is that he's 62 years old and
And
was
he's tired
arrested.
of it.
Yeah, he was actually arrested 12 times prior by NYPD dating back to 1984 to 98 for things like burglary, possession of burglary tools, sexual acts. In NJ, he was also arrested for like tampering and making alleged terrorist threats
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And he's also lived in places, in New York. He's from the Bronx. He's lived in Philadelphia. He lived in Milwaukee. And, people all said from those various areas he kept to himself and was not very friendly and stuff like that. So those are just the initial just information on who is Frank James.
Mhm.
And then, going into that incident. So we know that Frank James enters the station, right, Savory? And gets into, I guess, in the train and then like unloads a smoke can, couple of smoke cans. He threw them out into the train. I'm not sure if it was on the platform specifically, but it looks like from
I
camera
think it was
footages, it was
inside.
inside the train.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was inside.
And he unloads those smoke cans. He pulls out a firearm, what is said to be a Glock 17 or Glock 9. I'm not sure exactly. I think it was a 9 millimeter. And he started shooting at people. And he hit approximately like, I think he hit like 10 people, injuring with
That's
everyone
crazy.
running and smoke inhalation. 29 people were injured in total.
Damn, so this was really just you describing the situation, right? Renting the van, going like he really planned this. He knew exactly what he wanted to do,
Oh,
right?
this
This is what
was
you call
yeah.
premeditated when you're in
Oh
court.
yeah.
So he's going to be charged through that lens,
And you know where
of
he rented the
premeditated.
the van? He rented the van in Philadelphia. A
Yeah.
cargo white van, and he drove that joint. He first rented an apartment in Philadelphia on March, like I think 29th or so. I think he rented the place in Philadelphia at March 29th or something like that. And then on I think a day before, 2 days before the event that of the shooting,
Mhm.
he then rented the cargo white van and then um, drove that van all the way to New York City and then
Yeah.
parked it two blocks away from the station. So it seems like he had a plan in place of what he wanted to do.
Definitely. And you know what's crazy? That is a scary thing, right? Like, we grew up commuting. We grew up taking trains, right? And you
Right,
know that 99.9% of the people on trains are not armed, right? Ain't nobody
right.
walking around with guns in
Yeah.
New York. Ain't nobody walking around in ways that they can defend themselves. So you think about a situation where in New York, for those who don't know, you could open one train door in between what connects the trains, right? There's doors that you can go across really quick to
Oh
the
yeah.
next one.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
they're locked, Most of the times they are open, but sometimes they are locked, right? So I want to give people inside scoop. So now if somebody comes in, right, and you're trapped in that train cart and they open fire,
Oh yeah, it's a
you
that's a
you
mass.
you you
That's like
you
a
best
genocide.
believe that you don't have to be a good shot. You don't have to be trained. Anyone can just fire and hit people because everything is so enclosed together. And there's nobody to respond, right? Right. Let's get to the reality of this as well. This is heartbreaking, which is for those of y'all talking about guns and regulations and all that. People like him, right, who are going to acquire a gun are going to get a gun regardless. Right.
Yeah,
Is
and
the
believe it
point
or
I make.
not, Savory, he got the gun legally in Ohio, right?
Look at that.
Despite all the charges that he's had against him, none of them were felonious. He had not had one felony on his record, despite the
Really?
fact that he's had issues with the police in various states. He still was able to obtain a firearm
Yeah.
legally in
Because only a
Ohio.
felony would not allow you to obtain a firearm legally, right? If you have a
Right,
felony,
only a felony.
yeah, okay,
And
okay.
and to let's be clear here. I want to keep it that way, right? I think there are certain kinds of crimes
Yeah,
that
good point. That's a good point to
yeah,
mention.
I
Yeah, me
don't
too.
think
I think.
I
Yeah,
don't think
I'd love
that
to see more of what that entails, but I know I'm familiar with what a felony is. I'm thinking like I know misdemeanors. What's in between that? Nonetheless, I know felony is serious
well,
enough
it's
in most cases.
misdemeanor, yeah, it's misdemeanor then felony, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
severity of it, right? Misdemeanor is low level,
yeah, yeah.
felony is a higher
Yeah, I
level.
agree with that. You should have not. Yeah, but it's already.
Yeah.
But in New York, those
I
things don't matter, right?
Well, they're gonna
Let's put
argue
that out there.
our gun activists are probably gonna argue, hey, this is why we need to have more gun control. It's like, no, they did the right thing. He was able to obtain a gun legally. And I know a lot of people were saying, well, a lot of
No, but
people
he wasn't technically because the shooting happened in New York. So even with what you're mentioning, you're right. He got it legally, right? Let's go with that. But at the end of the day, the law in New York is nobody's supposed to have a gun, right? There's permits that they can have it at
right,
home, I hear,
right.
right? But as far as
Just
walking
because
with a gun,
yeah, just because he's able to obtain it in another state doesn't mean he has legal jurisdiction in another state. That's
exactly.
what you're saying. That's illegal.
Exactly. He can't have
Yes,
it in New
yeah.
York regardless. So again, it's a lose-lose situation for the average citizen, right? Who's trapped in a situation like this, very disheartening. And the man, whether he got it legally or illegally, at the end of the day, it's illegal because in New York you can't have a gun. And most law-abiding citizens, if they acquire a gun legally somewhere else, they know they can't bring it here. They'll probably follow the law. Criminals,
Right.
again, won't follow that law. So trapped again.
Which is what he essentially is. He was a lifelong criminal, right? Doing a lot of petty stuff, like burglary,
Yeah.
sexual acts. I mean, some of these things that he was arrested for, terrorist threats he's
Mhm.
made. He was caught with burglar tools. He was in possession of that. So he's
Yeah.
had an history of being arrested or having some kind of criminal history where he was dealing with the law officials. But again, this didn't bar him from getting a gun in Ohio. And I
Exactly,
know a
which
lot
is
of gun
interesting.
activists are going to argue that this is why we need to have more gun control. Do you think that's fair? Just before we keep going, do you think it's fair for them to
Look,
even argue this?
no, it's not fair at all because again, what are you arguing? The gun controls are incredibly strict in our jurisdiction in the laws that we
Right,
pass here, right?
right.
The point is, you can't argue he got it legally somewhere else. It came here. What are you going to argue that at a federal level, we should have gun laws like New York now, right? Right. So these people in New York who are passing these laws are going to argue that when it comes to gun laws and gun control, what they call. But again, even if he didn't acquire it legally, when you want to do a heinous act like this,
You're gonna do it.
you'll get a gun, bro. It
And
ain't that.
and and
It's
I
hard
think
maybe in a
I
state like
would
New York. It ain't hard everywhere.
I would make the argument, Savory, that this is why New Yorkers would need the right to have legal guns, right?
Of course.
It should be more easily available for them to be able to defend themselves. Because again,
Yeah.
uh, um, just a hint on what Frank James has said before in his social media. He said things like, "You can't have police at every station; it's
Mhm.
impossible." Even Frank
Yeah.
James said stuff
There was
like
no
that.
police at that train station, by the way, for those of y'all
No, there
who want
wasn't.
to know. So I read that
No.
there's no police in that train station. By the way, for commuting in New York, most train stations we stop at when we're waiting for the train, taking the train, you hardly see police. Every so often, you'll see a police
Well,
downtown
more
or
so
something like that.
now than ever before. They've
Yes.
they've
But
diminished their activity.
our
Yeah.
transit system is so complex and huge, and it's just grandeur is huge. So you
It's an
can't have it
underground
everywhere.
city. It's an
So
underground
it's
city.
like even
Yeah.
if you have a lot, we probably talking about a lot is 20%. Prior to
Yeah.
the pandemic, it was what 5-10%. Now it's 20, maybe 30, let's say. But that's 3 out of
It,
10 train stations. You
it's
know,
pretty well,
it's hard.
I'm making the argument that even the pandemic and with all the anti-police rhetoric, police have not been in a train station more so now than ever before. They would periodically ride the trains with riders,
Yeah.
to help mitigate or deal with some of the issues that may arise in the train. And what happened was, I think, they wanted to stop arresting people for like panhandling, for like
Yeah.
really petty stuff,
Yeah.
and
Hop in the
you know,
train, stuff like that.
right,
Yeah.
right. So I guess they were like, we should stop this, because it's not a good look at the optics. Again, politicians playing this game and stuff like that.
Yeah, politics
Anyways,
again. And hold up,
yeah,
Mach. I got one more thing for you here, right? That came to mind.
you could have several more things to
This,
share.
this is I think a good one to lead. I'm not a mind reader here, but we
Yeah.
coordinating here. I see where your next point might be going, but I got this for you. When what do you think would help when it comes to gun regulations, right? Like for example, think about New York. For many years, us riding the train where we grew up doing all this. Do you think it'll be the Wild Wild West if everyone owns a gun in New York, or do you think things will dial down and people would realize, like, yo, we gotta chill? Like, what direction you think it'll move if everyone was allowed to own a gun in a congested city? Because that is a challenge. I agree with some politicians. It's difficult. It's not like Texas, real congested city. What? How do you see this play out if that were to happen? If the laws were to change like that?
I think that one, we cannot assume that every person in New York City is going to even want a gun.
Hmm.
There are a lot of liberals in New York City, and they're not really about having guns and stuff like that, believe it or not. So I think if they
Yeah,
even gave people the right to have it, honestly, I don't think a lot of people would buy guns. I
uh,
think, to a degree, if people partook in terms of getting guns easily or having it easily accessible, right? You just go in, you file for it, 3 days later, boom, you pass background check, cool, you can pick up your gun now. We also have to remind ourselves how expensive it is to own a firearm. It's extremely expensive just to get a low level 9 millimeter gun, like the gun that, for example,
like
Fontaine.
expensive how?
Well, in New York City, a 9 millimeter can cost like maybe, $800-900.
Yeah.
Think about that, right? And then that's not including the ammunition. The ammunition is expensive as well.
But if just 20% of the people in New York acquire guns, that what if thought process will be in your mind when you're in a train station. Like, man,
What if
what
I
if
what if
this
I
person?
propose to you? What if I propose to you this, that 20% of people own guns in New York City, right? And yet we don't see
But
that
that's not
kind of.
true though, right?
I would say it's somewhere around that ballpark, because
Really?
again, it's hard to document who has guns and who doesn't, because again, people have guns illegally in New
But
York
not
City and not a
not
lot of
open
people know
carry.
about it.
Not no. Well, forget about
Oh,
open
well,
carry.
you're
Concealed
talking
carry. I
about
mean, concealed carry. Like
legally.
concealed
You're talking
carry.
about
Like people.
legally, right?
Yeah, legally concealed carry is way lower than that. Maybe at
Oh,
home they might have one.
of course, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe
What
at
I'm
home,
saying
but
is
yeah,
we don't know, because there are a lot of people who are carrying illegally who don't do anything illegal, other than the fact that they have the gun. There are
yeah,
people who just don't have dependency on the system, so they have guns at home just in case if they need it, right?
yeah.
Right. So people still
Most are not
circumvent.
walking with a gun. That's what I'm saying in
No,
relation
no,
to
no.
this incident.
But
Yeah.
there
So
is we average about 2,000 shootings a year in New York City, about two
yeah,
to 3,000 shootings a year. And most of those shootings are happening with people who own or possess those firearms illegally.
yeah. And they have their handguns. And by
Right.
the way, um we can't end without mentioning this. He handed himself in East Village on
Yeah.
Wednesday afternoon in a
Yeah.
McDonald's. So he phoned in Crime Stoppers, and he put a tip against himself from a McDonald's on First
Well,
Avenue.
not a tip. He actually said that I'm the person that you're looking for.
Yeah, but that's how
Yeah.
they word it since it's Crime Stopper tips, whatever, But yeah. So he said, I'm the actual person. He was on McDonald's First Ave on East 6th Street. So he just handed himself in and he said, I'm the person you're looking for. So
Well, by the
just
way, just
that's
to throw in
interesting
there
too.
before we wrap up, I listen. This guy This guy even took the train afterwards, after the incident. He took the train. He was on the train several times.
Yeah, I think he went to the other side where people were running.
Yeah,
and he went
he was on the
side,
train
yeah.
for a while. He was there. He was chilling. No, nothing. And then when he called, but just before he called, Xavier, I don't know if you know this, but just before he called Crime Stop, I think the reason why he did, other than the fact I guess he just wanted to end the search, it was a 30-hour search.
Yeah.
They were closing in on him, as the police commissioner says. The walls are closing in on him, right? They were narrowing down.
Yeah.
The FBI even raided his apartment in Philadelphia, so they were on him. The FBI was on him. The NYPD was on him. They were going to get him at some point.
Yeah.
I just want to indicate that when he made the phone call just prior, there was a person in a bodega. I guess some of these stores were able to spot him. There was some of these people spotted him, saw him, and immediately called Crime Stoppers.
Okay.
And they were like, "Yo, I saw him." They even got police. They
he was
I
gonna
guess
get caught eventually. What you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, and they were like, "Oh, I just saw the guy. I just saw the guy." And I guess at first the police, when they heard him call, they didn't think it was him. They probably thought it was a prank, from what I'm hearing, and they didn't respond immediately. So by the time they got there, he was the McDonald's people who spotted him too, who recognized him, said, "Hey, he went around the block. He was just walking casually.
Yeah, crazy.
He wasn't
He
even
handed
like, you know."
himself in nonetheless,
Yeah.
which is crazy. But
Yeah, it's crazy, and he is facing now federal terrorism charges, by the way. They said because he committed a heinous act, or a mass not a casualty. Thankfully, no one died. No
Yeah.
one died. Out of the 29 people who were injured, 10 of them were shot, but didn't suffer like severe injuries to the point of death, which is
Some are in
amazing.
stable condition in the hospital, but everybody survived. Yeah, so
But because he did this in a mass transit area, or a transient situation where there's a lot of people, could have been a lot of casualties. Now he's facing federal terrorism charges and could face up to life in prison for the rest of his life. He'll be in jail for the rest of his life, nonetheless.
that's a good rundown right there.
All right, so stick around for our second part that we dropping in a couple of days, guys. We'll have the potentially why behind why Frank James would commit such a heinous act.
His social
in this
media
fashion.
actions.
Yeah, his social media.
So,
Some of the things that Eric Adams had to say.
yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
We'll dive all right into it. So thank you for joining us. Stick around for our second part. Be await a couple of days. See you around.
Stay woke.